Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Jones, and I'm an American that lives in an area called Washington State. The United States has 50 states. Think of them as like a province. And I've lived here since 1991. It's in the northwest corner of the United States. We're going to watch a little video that tells you a little bit about the state that I'm from. And for people in places like Pakistan who may not know anything about Washington State, this will give you a little idea about the diversity of our country. And so we're going to go watch this video for a couple minutes.
Washington lies in the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Ocean forms the state's western border. Washington is the smallest state on the Pacific coast, but it is densely populated. The Cascade Mountain Range is Washington's greatest physical feature. The Cascades divide Washington into two sections. The area west of the Cascades, around Puget Sound, is where more than half of the state's people live. The land east of the Cascades is a plateau. The highest peak in the Cascades and in the state is Mount Rainier. The largest cities in Washington are Seattle, Spokane, Tacoma, and Vancouver. Washington's economy depends mostly on manufacturing and services. Technology and internet companies contribute a great deal to Washington's economy. Washington is also known for its apple orchards. It produces more apples every year than any other state. Native Americans lived in the Washington area for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. They include the Chinook, the Coast Salish, the Nez Perce, and the Yakima. Linda Buck, a scientist, was born and educated in Washington. She received the 2004 Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine. Bill Gates was one of the founders of Microsoft, the largest computer software company in the world. He is from Washington, so he chose to base Microsoft's headquarters in the state. Bonnie Dunbar was an astronaut from Washington. She was a part of 5 space shuttle missions, including the first one to dock with the Russian Mir space station.
It was very interesting to hear about Washington, especially the big personalities like Bill Gates.
Yes.
Belong to the Washington state.
Washington State's a very interesting state because there's so much natural diversity in just such a small area. There are 2 mountain chains, the Cascade Mountains and the Olympic Mountains. And there are several mountains in these mountain chains that are covered in snow all year. I look across the water to the Cascade Mountains when I look out my window each morning, and there's a mountain called Mount Baker, which is snow covered all year long. The state is named after our country's first president, President George Washington. So our state is named after President Washington. And we do have many very large industries here. Boeing manufactures planes here. I would imagine a lot of people from Pakistan may have flown on a Boeing plane at some point in their lives. Amazon, everybody's heard of Amazon. That's headquartered here. Microsoft is headquartered here. And I have visited the very first Starbucks store that ever was created. And that's in Seattle. Washington State, as the video said, is famous for apples. It's also famous for pears and cherries. We are the largest apple producer of any state in the country and one of the largest apple producers in the world. There's also an area just north of Seattle and very close to where I live that has lots of tulips, the tulip flower. And there's an area that has more tulips grown near Seattle than any place in the world except for the Netherlands. So we have the Cascade Mountains. Everything to the west of the Cascade Mountains tends to get more rain, more clouds, is very green and very lush. The Cascade Mountains trap a lot of the rain. So if you go east of the Cascades, it becomes desert, actual desert. And if you keep going even further east to the eastern edge of the state, it starts turning into sort of like forest and farmland and things like that. People don't think of Washington State as being a place for wine, but in the eastern part of the state where it is sunnier and warmer and drier, we are becoming very well known as an area excuse me, that's becoming known for its wines. So I will also say that Washington State is interesting politically. To the west of the Cascades is where most of the people live. There are a lot of more major cities like Seattle, and there tends to be more liberal, more we might use the term progressive politics. If you go east of the Cascades, it's more small towns and villages and farm areas, and they tend to be more conservative in their politics. So we have a lot of diversity in our state in a lot of areas. We don't have as many African Americans, as many blacks in our states as some other states have. But what we do have is we have a lot of Asians. Because we're on the West Coast, a lot of people from China and Japan and Korea have moved to our state. So in Washington State, we have a lot of Asians. In my family, my two daughters are from China. We adopted them when they were babies from China. So it's very common in my state, and particularly in the greater Seattle area, to see Caucasian parents like me with children who are Chinese. That's very common. So that's a little bit about Washington State. If I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Beyond my expectations, Washington is a very diverse state, I think so. And as you mentioned apples, so I have a question for you. That
yes,
as you have listened, that once apple a day keeps a doctor away. So how many apples do you eat in a day?
Not enough. Not enough. I'm not a big fan of apples. Unless it's apple pie, then I'm a big fan. Now, if it were an apple pie a day keeps the doctor away, I'd be in great shape.
I think so. There's so much diversity in terms of geography. Also, you have mountains, you have forests, and you have deserts. So I think so. It is a complete country in terms of geography. I think so.
Yes.
And very famous personalities you have, and famous tech companies in your country like Amazon.
Yeah.
So in terms of all these numbers, Washington is a major state, I think so, in the United States.
I think so too. It's a lovely place to live if you don't mind cloudy weather. I will also add another thing that makes it interesting. A couple things. First of all, we have many islands in our state. I live on one of those islands, an island called Camano Island. There's lots and lots of islands on the western edge of our state as you go towards the Pacific Ocean. Also, immediately north of us is Canada. And there's a beautiful city called Vancouver, Canada, which is not to be confused with Vancouver, Washington. But Washington State has a city called Vancouver at the southern edge of the state. But at the northern edge, you cross over Canada, and there's a beautiful city called Vancouver. And it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And so people go back and forth between Washington State and Vancouver all the time. My wife is Canadian, and I think the Canadian people are wonderful people. They're some of the most polite people you'll ever meet. And so we love going up into Canada as often as we can. Yeah.
Easy to travel from Washington to Canada. How you go to Canada, through flight or through plane or through road?
Depending on where you live, it's not hard to drive to Canada. Where I live, if you lived in Seattle, the biggest city in Washington State, it's about 3 hours to the Canadian border and about 3.5 hours total to get to the city of Vancouver. The challenge is right now with COVID, there's all sorts of travel restrictions. You have to show proof of vaccination. You have to show proof of a negative COVID test. So that adds complexity right now. But I'm hopeful that there will come a time in the next 6 months where life will start to return closer to normal. And then it really is just a matter of showing your passport. You do have to show your passport to cross over into Canada. But there's several places from Washington State that you can drive into Canada from. The Canadian-U.S. border, which is thousands of miles long. It's like 3,500 miles long from the western edge of the two countries to all the way to the East Coast, is the longest unprotected border between two countries in the world. There are no guards, there's no walls, there's no giant fences. It's unprotected. And that's because our two countries have, for almost forever, have had very close relations. I would say our closest ally is Canada, not just only closest geographically, but closest in terms of how we feel about each other. Canada and the U.S. are very close allies, and that's one of the reasons the border doesn't have a wall between it.
It is a good example for the whole world, I think so.
Yes.
And what you will say about the student's life in your country? If someone wants to study in Washington and he is foreigner, how student friendly is Washington State in terms of education?
Washington State is a very good state in terms of education. We invest a fair amount of it in our taxes. I can't explain why, but not all states have the same quality of public school education for teenagers and stuff as other places. Washington State has really strong academic standards. A student coming from another country would receive a very good education here. We have a lot of exchange students that come here for a year or 2 years or 3 years, both at the high school level and at the college university level. We have a lot of international students that come. The University of Washington is a very good university that's based in Seattle, and there's a lot of students from all over the world that attend that university. So yeah, and that was an important thing for us when we moved to Washington State many years ago. We wanted to make sure we lived in an area that had good schools because we knew we were going to have kids someday, and having a good education is one of the most important factors in determining what kind of quality of life you have as you move through life, is having a good education. I was fortunate. I went to a private school, all boys private school, from grades 1 through 12. That's very unusual. So I went to a school that was just boys and very strict. Not a lot of students per teacher. And so I was very blessed and very fortunate to get a really good education from grades 1 through 12. And then I went to university. So.
As you said that you are from New York, if I'm not wrong, and you also lived in Miami. So
yes.
What was that particular thing which Washington attracted you and you settled in Washington?
That's a great question, Hamad. Why did I move to Washington State? Here's why. This is the absolute truth. My wife and I took a vacation in August in 1988. Now, Washington State is very cloudy in the wintertime, especially the side west of the Cascades where Seattle is. But that's where we spent our vacation. But in June, July, August, and maybe the first half of September, the weather here is unbelievably beautiful. It's totally sunny. It's not hot. It's not humid. There's no insects or bugs. And there is so much beauty here, the mountains and the lakes and the volcanoes. So we went on vacation for about 10 days in August of 1988. My wife and I were living in a city called Philadelphia, which is sort of near Washington, D.C. and New York City and all that. And we were so sad when we came back from our vacation because we were sad to be living in Philadelphia and wishing we could live in a place as beautiful as Washington State. So only 2 years later, my wife's employer gave her an opportunity to apply for a transfer. And she applied for Seattle, Washington for their office, and they said yes. So my wife got a job in Seattle, and I did not have a job, but I moved with her, and then I found a job. But that was 1990. My wife moved in 1990. I moved in early 1991, and I've loved it. I've never regretted it ever since.
The last thing which I will say that after listening about a lot of things about Washington, you know that I live in Lahore, and Lahoris say that "Jinne Lahore nahi vekhya jamya hi nahi" in Urdu, and in English it means that if somebody has not visited Lahore, he is not born yet. So you should also say for your state, Washington, that if somebody did not have visited Washington, he is not born yet.
There you go. I love that. And one of the things I often think about is you can kind of get an idea if a city or a region is a desirable place to live by asking yourself this question. Are there more people moving to that place, or are there more people moving away from that place? And in the case of Washington State and Seattle and the areas near it, there are far, far, far more people moving to it than there are moving away from it. And it's because it's a wonderful quality of life. The summers are not too hot. The winters are not too cold. It snows once or twice a winter, and then it all melts. And people are very nice to each other here. One of the things I discovered early on is that people are very friendly even to total strangers. And I have a theory about why. I may be wrong, but this is my theory. Washington State is a place where there are not many people who lived here from birth. Most of the people have moved here from someplace else. So everybody at one point or another was a newcomer, was a stranger, and didn't know anybody because they moved here from somewhere else. And I think that causes people to be very kind to other strangers because we all were a stranger at one point in time. That's just my theory. I've never heard anybody ever say, yes, that's right. But I have found that the people in Washington State are very, very friendly to people, even people they don't even know. Somebody you meet on the street, very friendly.
So everything is perfect. People are friendly. Your places are beautiful. Your weather is excellent. Your places are very beautiful. So I should visit Washington now.
Absolutely. Hamad, come on, visit. Anyone else watching this video, come to Washington. My name is Tim Jones. Look me up on Camano Island and I'll give you a tour of my lovely state. All right.
Thank you, Tim, for such wonderful tour. Goodbye, our viewers, and we will keep bringing some informative videos of Pakistan and America to bring some culture together, and we will show the face of both countries, which is hidden yet.
That's right. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.